Everyone, happy Monday. Thank you so much for joining us. Many of our followers have turned to us to help them while trying to conceive. And by lowering your toxic burdens, you can help balance your hormones, which then can help with fertility. You're also creating a really healthy environment for your unborn kids. It is important to us that we create content to help those to lessen also postpartum stress. As we know, this journey is long. And that's why today we have invited Jadah Parks Chatterjee, a maternal child health registered nurse and international board certified lactation consultant to join us. Jadah is also an advisor to Bobbie, the infant formula. And so we're going to discuss not only lactation techniques, but as well as how to find organic baby formulas. So.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Happy Monday. I'm so glad it worked out.
Oh my goodness. It's just like that typical Monday morning when you think, your clothes are all laid out, your desk is ready, the kid has been fed, and then you look up and you're like, wait a minute. I'm not 15 minutes early, I'm 15 minutes late.
That's okay. That's okay. We're just glad you could join because this is like such an important topic to talk about. And we had a couple people who probably just heard my spiel like 2 times already, but I'm so glad you could join and then we could get to the content. This is awesome.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for having Grace. I'm just, living this homeschool nursing, human life.
Totally, totally. So I gave a brief introduction. I mentioned that you are child health registered nurse and also international board certified lactation consultant. You're also an advisor to Bobbie Infant Formula, and I encouraged everyone to check out your website and also check out Bobbie's website. So just thank you.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your background on how you become a registered nurse and an international board certified lactation consultant.
Yes. So, I have always been interested in good food. I'm from Louisiana and I did a lot of work with Children's Hospital in pediatrics as a infection preventionist. And one of the things I kept seeing was, just what we could do in order to support a better feeding, to support a healthier gut. And had completed my nursing school at that point, and I hadn't necessarily taken a deep dive into a specialties. I was working as an infection preventionist, but that wasn't the clinical work that I had ever really imagined for myself. It was just a new line of work, and I was very curious. It was very interesting, and so I never really lost my interest in maternal child health. I then went on and did a labor and delivery new grad rotation, which is kind of, I hope things are getting back to where they're heard of, because we definitely need more labor and delivery nurses in order to be able to expand on this specialty. And what I kept seeing after I was supporting parents deliver was they needed help with breastfeeding, right? Like that was where the real switch turned on for families and their faces, I noticed. And this was before masks. We were wearing masks. So you really got to get to know who your parents were, in a longer period or in a quicker period of time because you could see all of their facial muscles. And I just saw a lot of, just like pause and concern and, sore cracked nipples, all the things, pain. So I went and got more education and I became a lactation educator first. That is the nursing route for lactation education, and get hours in during my practice at the bedside. So I was working with live patients through all of my practicums. And then I decided to go on and pursue my international board certification, which, really I had thought of as maybe as a supplement because I wasn't sure what I wanted to pursue as a master's level. But the education needed for a lactation consultant is the equivalent of getting a PhD because of the amount of clinical hands-on time that you receive. And that was really fascinating. And I could just like compare it to all of these other things that I was doing with my infectious disease team. And, I was just learning so much. So I get, I have the lucky life of being able to be a nurse. I take care of postpartum patients at the bedside, which is just brings me tons of joy. I get to learn a lot about the human being, and I get to support them during a time when it's most confusing, when they're trying to balance everything else, which is to support them to feed their babies. And I support feeding babies regardless if it's with your body or if you choose to feed your baby formula. What I walked away with as a nurse and during my first year as a bedside nurse was that parents needed to feel supported. And there was so much pressure as well at, like surrounding the bedside from, well-intentioned family members and friends, but also even, from my colleagues coming in saying things that, could be triggering and make you feel
Mhm.
like you may not be able to show up the way your baby is showing up. Like they're not dancing in the way that everybody's saying they should, but you have this pressure to do something. And I just wanted to be able to create space for people so they can do what they need to do and also to gather information so they can make informed decisions.
That makes a lot of sense. So what does a lactation consultant do, and why would someone seek out for a lactation consultant?
Well, I mean, lactation consultants are like, they should be like the fairy little nurses and that roll into your life and make things better and sprinkle dust, right? And fairy dust that makes everybody smile and giggle, feel good, and transfer milk and knowledge. But it's quite complex. It is really having an understanding of anatomy, physiology, how that relates to the production of milk, how does transfer of milk actually occur, really becoming more versed in hormones needed in order to release so that the production of milk actually occurs, recognizing when those things are not present, and then being able to support, a plan in partnership with the family. We also are, therapist
Mhm.
because it's a lot of psychosocial emotional. I think that lactation consultants come with, not just knowledge, but also a good ear to
Mhm.
listen and emotional intelligence in order to recognize body language. Um, Really being able to like recognize and check bias because we're humans, and it's like a constant opportunity to serve at the highest level because you get to serve the child, right? And be able to do so to have an impact that lasts throughout their lifespan. I know that the families that I get to serve, they never forget me. So
It's such critical time too.
mhm.
And we promote a lot for breastfeeding, and then, we want people to make really educated decisions about their health and their children's health. So tell us a little bit about the specific benefits of breastfeeding.
Oh wow. Well, I mean, they're like, there's the basics because we get immunity for the baby. We transfer lots of immunity from the parent to the baby during those first just few hours of life, right? I always tell my parents, really, regardless of what your feeding choice is, if you plan to do any amount of body feeding, let's do it right after the baby is born so the baby can get the colostrum, which we're
Mhm.
still learning how much it is packed with nutrients in order to be able to support the baby throughout the lifespan. The other, because we could go on and on about the baby, but I want to raise up our mothers, right? And our mothers to be and friends and family members of mothers to really be able to support the feeding journey if that is what the choice is, to
Mhm.
support and benefit the parent that delivered the baby, right? So, excuse me, we're talking about hormones, right? This is a hormone game that we're playing.
Yeah.
And in playing this hormone game, we are releasing hormones to increase a volume of a product in our body to transfer to another human. And then our body still needs to be able to
Mhm.
rest, recover, sleep, manage, and balance off any, elevated concerns that we have, like cardiovascular
Mhm.
disease or concerns. Our endocrine system is all wrapped in there. And so if there's things or concerns going on with diabetes, not gestational diabetes, but if a parent has type 1 or type 2 diabetes, it definitely helps to regulate their
Mhm.
insulin levels during feeding. I think that's really important to hear. I see a lot of patients that have gestational diabetes. I also see a lot of patients that have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, and that combination of type 1, type 2 diabetes and or
Mhm.
hypertension, they're like cousins. So like they go hand in hand. And if I see one, then I really want to find out what is
Mhm.
the feeding plan so that I can support
Right.
body feeding in order to protect and prevent the other from its rapid onset or to delay it, right?
That is huge. So
Yeah.
what would you tell, like, some tips you would recommend to new parents who's like who are hesitant about, breastfeeding and or like, don't know where to begin?
Yeah, I always start off with talking to your family or your who's in your support team, right? Because feeding is teamwork. uh and in that we want to gather the team and the support persons and then come up with a feeding plan, right? And really it's the feeding plan to accompany the birth plan, but the real work is the feeding plan to accompany the postpartum journey. Really the blueprint for the postpartum journey is a feeding plan, right? And on that feeding plan, we want to talk about who are we going to engage that's going to be our person to walk with us through this prenatal, birthing, and postpartum experience as it relates to feeding. And so I
Mhm.
always recommend either meeting with your OB, midwife, or lactation consultant to do a breast assessment and talk about your history, and let's identify if there are any possible concerns or potential barriers
Mhm.
in your medical history that could impact feeding your baby. So one of the things we know is that when we have a parents that have any concerns with infertility, then we want to be mindful about what our feeding plans are, because I'm seeing a lot of different outcomes with my families with infertility treatments, and now we have a baby. Some of those parents are like the cutest cows I've ever seen, and all they do is express milk, right? And that is something I'm still deep diving into that myself in order to have a better understanding. Um, but there is a population that have had concerns with infertility, and there's not the volume of milk on board needed to transfer to the baby, or there are the vision of the
Mhm.
breast assessment shows things like short, flat nipples,
Mhm.
maybe very inverted nipples, maybe,
Mhm.
and that's necessary. Right? Like those are things that we want to think about as our anatomy in order to be able to support the baby to have a deep, secure latch that's going to be comfortable for the parent and that's going to support the baby to be in a great position to help transfer volume of milk.
Oh my God, this is like so complicated.
It's so complicated, and I think that we don't, as lactation consultants, we could do a better job of recognizing how complicated it is,
Mhm.
right? And really giving ourselves the time we need in order to like marinate on what's in
Mhm.
front of us. And so I think, I live in this bubble. I mean, I literally live in a bubble, and I live in a bubble because I'm trying to have an understanding of what is it that I am doing in this bubble? Because I'm not oversaturated with patients. I'm not, and when I'm inpatient, I'm not the lactation consultant. I have my 3 to 4 couplets, and that's who I'm focused on supporting. So I have the ability to only streamline my focus for a small group of people,
Mhm.
whereas the lactation consultant that is in hospital
Mhm.
is responsible for figuring out how to prioritize anywhere from 10 to 25 patients on the unit. And that's not just one patient. Those are rooms. So technically that would be 20 to 50 humans because the mom and baby come as a pair. Right. And so that's if I hear a lot, the lactation consultant just came in and did this one thing and answered these few questions and then left. And so the response to that is not to justify the behavior, but really to have a better understanding of how can we eliminate that feeling, right? And I've been chatting a lot with my colleagues about just the consumer responsibility for their care and really partnering in your care. So I always recommend a postpartum feeding plan, a breast, chest, and even an endocrine assessment, right? Have a conversation about feeding and then really having education before delivering your baby, like early. I think some of the most successful and less anxious families are those that I get to meet when they're like 20 weeks pregnant, right? And that's after the 20-week scan. So we know things are moving in a good direction. We have a pretty good idea of what's going on in our bodies. We have more questions and curiosity. Our partners and family members are looking at us like, wow, you're creating a human life. That's awesome. Yes, let's learn more about this. So then that way, when you come to the hospital, specifically, and if you're delivering in a medical institution, then you come with a basic bag of knowledge, right? Like we call it at Loon, we call it a basic bag of goods, so that you know what are the basics for you. So when you reach out to the lactation consultant, who is a specialist, it's like calling for the cardiologist. There is a concern, right? And we are going to come up with a very detailed plan in order for you and your family to implement so that we can get two answers, because we're looking for two positive outcomes. One, we're looking for the parent to be comfortable and to not be in pain and to feel good about their experience. And then two, we're looking for transfer and volume of milk in the baby.
That makes so much sense because I know parents spend a lot of time feeding that baby. The baby needs to eat every other hour, which is a lot of time. Having a plan then can really help ease out the stress. And then also having the bag of goodies you already have, then you can actually ask the lactation consult specific questions that just pertain to you and then really address it in a short period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Jenna, if families are feeding their babies every other hour, that's a lovely yellow flag for me to reach out to a lactation consultant, because we shouldn't be feeding babies every other hour. We should be feeding babies every 3 to 4 hours, newborn babies, right? Because they're eating often in order to increase the caloric volume of milk that they need for energy so they can continue to grow. And then that 3 to 4 hours start stretching a little bit every month. I like to say every month, but the real deal is probably it starts stretching about the third month once eating and growing is successfully like on a track. And so if you're feeding your baby every 90 minutes, that's an opportunity to reach out and ask like what's going on, right? Because I don't know if we're talking about mental health, but if we're talking about feeding our children, I think, and we're talking about sleeping every hour and a half, then we can't help but talk about mental health, because the parent feeding that baby is not sleeping and neither is their partner. I see lots of fathers at the bedside and other support persons and partners at the bedside with eye mask. And it's because they understand what their role is, right? Their role is as a support person. And they know in their role as a support person, they need to get rest.
That's true.
But the parent who delivered the baby is sending all the messages and feeding out the birth certificate. I'm like, what is going on? So, it can, the job comes along with a large level, also a frustration for humans, right? Because it's like, what is the plan, right? Like we've communicated that the baby's going to wake up every 3 hours to eat and the parent needs to sleep. So what is the plan here, right? Oh, I just need to send these messages to all of my cousins overseas. That's great. Can they do that?
Right, exactly. But I know I have heard from friends who had difficulties with breastfeeding, and I think one of the issues which you also mentioned a little bit is the whole latching. Um, and they just like, okay, it's really hard, and many of them even said, giving birth wasn't the hardest, breastfeeding was the hardest.
Yeah.
So, like, what are some like reasons like why the infant like might not latch onto a parent?
So I want everybody who's on here to find your favorite baby doll or your favorite stuffy and like practice holding it like a baby and practice holding it the way that you would hold your baby, right? And so we always hold our babies. Here, let me get my baby. Hold on. Okay. So when we hold,
Oh my God.
I know, so cute, Priscilla. So we like to hold our babies like so, right? Babies don't like this. They like this, right? So when you hold your baby stomach to stomach, and I'm going to stand stomach to stomach, nose to nipple. You see how I'm holding this baby? You see the arms? When I get ready to cradle, most parents do this.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is you end up moving the nipple out of the baby's mouth. Right. So, we talk a lot about oral anatomy. And so everybody put your tongue to the top of your mouth. You're getting a consult from me. Like how far your nipple needs to be in the baby's mouth. That's far.
Yeah.
Right. So think about that. Okay. And I think one of the main things that I see is baby being held like this. Right. I see babies being held like this. Only a pro is throwing footballs. Okay, let's keep it real. All right, like you are not a pro at feeding this baby yet. Okay, babies don't become pros at eating until somewhere around 4 to 6 weeks, right? Does everybody become like breastfeeding, body feeding successfully established? And so until then, you want the parent that's feeding the baby to be comfortable, but we can't start off in comfort, right? Like the baby didn't get here in comfort and they don't start eating in comfort. So you have to learn how to position and hold.
Right. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
This is like everyone needs to be consulted and taught like how to actually do this properly. Otherwise, they just get really frustrated. And we already know that, postpartum depression is, a real thing.
It's real. It's really real. And I can see how it starts with feeding. Yeah, it's real. I mean, like I get frustrated and it's not my baby. Right? It's frustrating.
Yeah.
So in that moment, you guys, this is what I do, right? I literally, even as the nurse, like I sense it, the baby senses, because the baby is very sensitive. Right. But in that moment, we really have to take a pause and take a mindful mama moment, right? Like those are my over there with the mindful mama app, and take like 2 minutes just to like meditate and reset. Because your baby senses your energy. And that energy, not to place any more pressure than there already is, but that energy transfers to the baby, right? And so, just reset and know that everything's okay, right? Like everything's okay. You just have to start from the beginning and try it again.
Yeah. So other than like positioning and then also understanding your breast anatomies and everything, is there any other ways to prevent like painfulness during breastfeeding?
Oral anatomy checks for the baby. Yeah. So we saw a lot of frenulums being assessed and lots of frenulectomies that were occurring. And everybody said, like every lactation consultant sees a baby with a tongue tie and wants to do something about it. Well, yeah, because we're feeding babies with body parts that we weren't really doing a lot of, and it's creating pain and discomfort and sore and cracked and bleeding nipples, and mastitis and abscess. It's like, we want to do something. So the parent that's feeding the baby isn't so uncomfortable during the process. So an oral anatomy is very important. You can begin by looking in your mouth and your partner's mouth. So a frenulum is like at the top of your mouth. You can feel you have like a piece of tissue next to your gum, to the edge of your lip, and then under your tongue, same thing. You can see there's a piece of tissue. That tissue, I'm going to use this as a tissue. If it's the baby's tongue does a rolling action, right? And that tissue, depending on where it's landing, can inhibit the rolling action from occurring, and it creates discomfort here on the parent's nipple. So it's super important to have the baby's mouth assessed. Your midwife is likely a really good person to look and see because they see lots of babies. And they can see and treat babies through the first 30 days of life.
Mhm.
Also, your lactation consultant will look if you're delivering your baby in a medical institution, then the nurse at the bedside can see some things, right? Because they see babies, but they will likely place a lactation consult for the consult to come and do an oral anatomy check.
Yeah.
Pediatricians do oral anatomy checks as well, but they're looking for things, in my experience, they're looking for things from a speech and language point of
Mhm.
view. And unless there is sore, cracked nipples and someone saying, yeah, but they're exclusively breastfeeding and the parent has nipple trauma, then their brains are not really working in that function to look for feeding reasons, right? And that's yeah, and those pediatricians, they have very good relationships with lactation consultants because their ego is at the door and they know that. Yeah,
Yeah. So it's really important to know this information to know who to look for to help you solve your problem.
that's why the lactation consultant is a fairy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so for the parents who cannot, like, breastfeed, obviously we want to encourage everyone to breastfeed. So for the parents who cannot or partially breastfeed, can like formula supplement breastfeeding?
Of course, yes, you can feed your baby human milk or formula. It's you're feeding both. If you're doing both human milk and formula, then the recommendation is to make sure you either pump or hand express before you get the baby formula because you want to make sure you continue to tell your body every 3 to 4 hours that we're still releasing hormones needed in order to make milk. Major thing, right? And then the other is to make sure that if we're feeding the baby formula, we're feeding the baby according to the manufacturer's feeding recommendations, as well as preparing the milk and storing the milk. Okay, so
Mhm.
like this is where all of your chemistry comes out from high school, but you want the level to be level. And you want to make sure you're using the correct amount of water because that makes a difference in the caloric volume of the volume of milk that you're going to give.
Yeah, the first time I learned about baby formula, I was like, okay, this is actually like a drug. Like, I mean, it's essential. It's not just like, when you grow up, you can eat anytime you want. Like, baby needs very essential amount of calories and nutrients, and you
Mhm.
really need to follow instructions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in some places, I mean, now, formula is readily available in hospitals and however, in some places, depending on who is staffed, not everyone can administer the formula, right? So I know we can go on our aisles and pick up formula at the grocery store, but in the hospital, we consider formula a medication.
Mhm.
And so we want to make sure that, we're not overfeeding the baby, we're not underfeeding the baby, because I get a lot of that with my families that want to do both, right? And that's a concern as well. We want to make sure that we're giving proper volumes of milk in order to make sure that the baby's satiated.
Yeah, I know a while ago we had baby formula issues, not just heavy metal contamination, but many other issues. So why should and I obviously we all know organic formulas are better. So why should the parents, search for a organic formula to feed them for their baby?
Oh, well, first of all, doing research is you doing your part as the consumer, right? And being able to be in partnership with your healthcare team. And that's really important. Also, when we learn, we grow and we become empowered because we are now making informed decisions. And I think that's really important to make decisions that you feel good about versus
Mhm.
decisions that you may have been shamed into.
Right.
The USDA has organic standards that are some of the strictest in the world for quality, ethical treatment of animals, and when it comes to formula, having a non GMO antibiotic free milk source. I work with Bobbie team, and I'm really proud to be a part of their platform and their mission, to shake the stigma and to really be able to provide a good organic product for our children at the start of life. And they plan to keep supporting families who want to breastfeed successfully, but we also want to make sure that we have a plan to feed the baby because that is very important. And I have seen, my NICU colleagues are some of the most interesting conversations when I get to float in the NICU. I am always, paused by families that want to exclusively breastfeed. The plan was to exclusively breastfeed, but we got a preterm baby, and that was not the plan. And those are some of the hardest conversations, right? Because as adults, we make plans and we stick to them. We do not let them go. We are like peanut butter on sourdough. We do not let go. And it's like, okay, I there's space for a plan. But it's a blueprint. So I try to not call it a plan because blueprints are, things that you can make changes to as needed in order to make sure that when you lay a foundation, it's going to be good. But those families that want to only exclusively breastfeed their babies, it's a wiring, right? Then we become mind over matter at that point. And that is hard, and it's hard for the parent. And now all of a sudden we have to engage and involve a lot of other people to support making a good decision for the baby. But we just that's when you reach out to a lactation consultant in order to be able to like help you figure out and understand what the next steps are, because nobody likes to just be told what to do, right? Like in healthcare, we want to be in partnership with the patient.
Absolutely.
The patient really wants to be in partnership with us. So we have to continue to do our part in order to make that happen.
Absolutely. And what prompted you to work with Bobbie?
Oh, I mean, like they're just like the sweetest humans ever, right? My first conversation with Laura and Sarah was dynamic, right? We had a dynamic connection from the beginning, and it's because we have the same values, right? Like the value is that I'm here to support the parent to implement their ideals, right? However, there are unexpected changes that may come along in this journey, and I'm still here. I want to make sure that they still have a very good plan to implement. So I understood that they understood modern parenthood. And that's where we're doing right now. Like I'm juggling, homeschooling my kid, working, trying to figure out the Instagram live. You're right. Baby in the bag over here. Look, we're just doing all of this. And I really think it's about supporting the 83% of families that turn to formula. That's a big number.
That's a big number.
That's a big number, and when I learned that from their perspective, I had already had data and information because of my background in infection prevention and my understanding about how important it was to make sure that the baby's gut lined was a priority when providing care. And I was like, I'm in. Like, this is a team that is not going to they're not going to deter away a parent that wants to provide their baby with human milk, right? And I think that is what we need parents doing business that resemble our experiences, and I think they both did a really good job of that. And they built an amazing team of people. I mean, they're some of my most favorite people that I get to chat with. I'm always happy when they want to do work with me.
This is pretty awesome because I think before Bobbie, I have not come across any organic baby formulas. I just have not seen, and I also seeing the standards that Bobbie have, the certifications and all these things, and you're just like really impressive, and how we're really into having people detox and reducing exposures. And then we often tell, even when parents are trying to conceive, that avoid toxic chemical exposures, because this can really impact your kid. And a lot of these exposures are actually from diet, pesticides and then heavy metals and all these things. So having an organic baby formula, especially during this like critical time of development, is
It's huge. And I think that in food, we're evolving, right? Like we are meeting the mark
yeah.
with food, right? I also appreciate that Bobbie's standard is modeled after the European formulas. So it's meeting USDA qualities, but it's clean label certified, as you mentioned. And it's pesticide free certified. That's a big deal, right? Like these are most precious humans. And as we continue to learn about how the brain and the gut go hand in hand and determine, how children grow, thrive, develop, it it's it matters because it's our world that will be in their hands in 30 years. And so what are we laying in our foundation I think is so important. And look, I was fed formula. I don't even know what kind of formula I was fed. Yeah. So my mama gave me like, grits as a 3-month old. I mean, I turned out fine, right? We all turned out fine. We know that. I have those conversations all the time. I get it. However, when we know that there is better, then we seek to add better to our lives in order for the next generation to continue to sow better, right?
Absolutely.
So that's what we get to do at Bobbie.
This is amazing. Thank you so much, Jadah. This is like
Oh, welcome.
such great information and all the tips. So thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you. And have a wonderful day. I hope we get to do this again soon.
Yes, we're gonna have to invite you back on to talk about Loom and then your other services. So I encourage yep. I encourage everyone to follow Jadah. We'll have all Jadah's handle and also website promoting this live. And then also be sure to follow Bobbie and check out all the quality formula if you're thinking about switching your baby or feeding your baby formulas.
And
thank you so much, Jadah.
And Bobbie is now in Target, so you can pick up Bobbie in Target.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for joining. Bye.
Bye.